So Absolute Flash honestly just changed the game. One, because we learn more about the nature of his powers in relation to Darkseid, and two, this storyline does more to expand on the Absolute Universe than any comic that's happened up to this point, including Batman, Superman, and anything else. And so what this does is this picks up in the aftermath of Wally West and the disappearance of his father. For those of you guys who need a little bit of catching up here, the idea behind this was that Wally West had learned about something called a still point, which is actually going to be expanded on here. The still point almost looked to be the source of power for Absolute Flash, and to a degree it is. But in the midst of all of the chaos, his father was caught in the still point. So the main goal of Wally is to find a way to get his father out. But the other part of this is that in the absence of his father in his life, he's returned to the Dibney mission, right? The youth center. And this is basically just a home for children who are effectively trying to find their way in the world or kind of passing through from one place to the next, but it's a safe space. But one of the things that had happened was that Wally West had faced off against Heatwave, which historically speaking in the main DC universe is a guy who just uses a flamethrower. In the Absolute universe, he's literally a guy made of molten lava. Now, this was an attempt at one point to turn him into a metahuman, but it just had gruesome results. But the whole conflict happened right there at the youth mission for Ralph Dibney. And so that's why he comes out asking questions like, look, I know we didn't talk about it before, but we need to talk about what happened. And the funny thing is that Wally doesn't really have a desire to discuss it, and even goes so far as to say he doesn't really know what Ralph is talking about. And while Ralph technically saw the Flash facing off against Heatwave, the guy's no fool, right? And I mean, he picked up very, very quickly that it's Wally, mostly because of the fact that Wally probably has the worst disguise ever for a superhero, right? You can see his hair, you can see most of his face. He's got transparent goggles. I mean, it's a terrible disguise. At least Batman covers the top of his face. And so ultimately, Ralph doesn't push it and just allows things to go under the bridge. One of the things that he does mention here, though, is that cops showed up asking questions. And then after a while, people in suits showed up and the cops stopped asking questions. And so what he ends up doing is showing that there's an individual by the name of Hunter Zolomon who had previously appeared as part of the Department of Extranormal Operations, basically people who investigate these crazy scenarios. And that ultimately Ralph reveals to Wally that he's not going to turn him in. But while this is not one of the character introductions that I'm talking about here, it is actually a pretty cool moment because Hunter Zolomon, historically speaking in DC Comics, has been Reverse Flash. Technically it's Zoom or Professor Zoom or something like that. But the fact is, right, he is a villainous version of the Flash that faces off against Wally. Technically he debuted back in 2001 from Jeff Johns, but I would argue he's actually like the third version of Reverse Flash. And the reason why I say that is that while Eobard Thawne is technically the first quote-unquote Reverse Flash, the first character to hold that name, if you go back further in 1949, you actually get Rival. And Rival was not really called Reverse Flash, but still essentially played the same role, right? The antithesis to the Flash at the time. And so again, it really kind of changes depending on what you're talking about. So it doesn't really look like Hunter Zolomon is playing a Reverse Flash role within this story. If anything, it's just kind of a cool little Easter egg and a reference, although we may see him in the future of the comic. What's really interesting here is the connection between Wally West and Linda Park. And I'm very hesitant to use the word relationship here because they don't quite have one yet, although seemingly that may become the case as time goes on. But in the main DC universe, I mean, these two are like a power couple, and Linda Park is a lot more than just the damsel in distress, the girl that Wally West saves in the main DC universe when everything's just struggling. The way you see her here in the Absolute universe is very reminiscent of her character in the main DC universe, which is to say, as the two of them start talking with one another, one of the things that she establishes here, despite the fact that they've known each other for a little bit, is she immediately knows he's Flash, right? And where he kind of tries to deny it, like, oh, I don't know what you think you thought you saw. She's like, I mean, dude, come on, man. Like the goggles, the hair, the face. I mean, this is obviously you, right? So let's go talk about this. And so you do get her kind of getting the backstory of Wally, because up until this point in time, they were aware of each other. They'd converse, they'd socialize, but in a lot of ways, they were kind of an enigma. And now that they're learning about one another's stories, it's actually really, really cool. And it's one of the best parts of the absolute universe, to be honest. Not everything is dark and bleak. Some things are kind of great and hopeful. In fact, absolute Superman's getting to that point right now. But one of the things that's funny is he takes out the costume and shows it to her, and he's like, well, I mean, here it is. What do you think? Like, I think it's cool. And she's like, I mean, I guess. She starts busting his balls, right? I mean, like, it could look a little bit cooler. In Wally's defense, the costume is pretty dope. Right now, is it as iconic as the actual Flash costume in the main DC universe? No, not a chance. It's nowhere near as amazing, but it is still pretty cool, to be honest. But one of the other cool things that he does is he takes her for a ride. Like, literally, she jumps on his back and he starts running because she's like, I want to know how fast you can go. And in fact, he starts going so fast, she actually starts to puke, right? So she has to jump off because she's not quite ready for it. But it is kind of a fun interaction with the two of them. And so at that point, you start to get into that conversation about their backstories. And so Wally kind of fills her in on how Barry Allen and Eleanor Thawne were working together to access this crazy source of energy out there, which turned out to be the still point, and that the goal was to figure out a way to harness that power. Now, seemingly what Barry didn't know, and what we figured out pretty quickly as the audience, is that Eleanor Thawne, being part of the Absolute Justice League, so basically a group of villains within the DC universe, wanted to use this power for her own ends. But in the midst of all that, the exploration of this energy source and so on, Wally West ended up just being in the wrong place at the wrong time and got his powers, as opposed to Barry Allen, and that Barry Allen himself was stuck in the Still Force and can't actually leave the Still Force. He has no physical body to go back to. And so with Wally's dad being stuck there, the main goal that he has in the here and now is to figure out some way to rescue his father. Now, he does also offer an explanation about his mother, that his mother had bipolar disorder. And while I don't necessarily know that I agree with the way the bipolar disorder is being described here, it does kind of hit on the very fundamental basics of it, right? Which are manic phases, right? Hitting the highs, and then depression, which is hitting the lows. It's certainly a lot more nuanced than that. But the way that Wally explains it here is that seemingly his mother was going through a very low point. And the result was that she ended up taking her own life. And so Wally had kind of been wrestling with that ever since. And in a lot of ways, that's where a lot of the anger and the vitriol that he had with his father stemmed from. Although that might not really be the right description. Resentment, I think, is the best way to describe his relationship with his dad. We didn't fully understand why. We just knew that they had a very, very strained relationship. What we end up learning through all of this was that with his father constantly off doing his work and constantly being away from home, it oftentimes came down to Wally to take care of his mom. And that can put a lot of strain on anyone, especially when you're at a young age where in your teenage years, you're going around making mistakes, screwing up, right? All the while forgetting about the fact that the world existed before you. There was a whole world before you ever existed. And so you don't really have it all figured out, but that's just kind of the nature of your teenage years, navigating the world around you. Wally didn't have that luxury. Wally didn't really have the ability to do that. And so again, a lot of the resentment stems from there. Now, we do get a bit of a glimpse from the life and times of Linda, although we will learn a little bit more about that here in a bit. And so she seemed to have struggled in very much the same way. But again, a lot of her backstory isn't necessarily provided here. What ends up happening though is that as the two of them are talking and Wally starts talking about his father, her response is, well, then let's go find him, right? The kicker about this is that all Wally knows is that his father's in the Still Force or the Still Point. He doesn't really quite know how to access him. And so that's where Linda's like, well, I mean, what do you know about Project Olympus, right? What do you know about what your father was actually working on? And that's kind of the irony of the story is Wally doesn't really know anything. And it kind of makes perfect sense to a degree. I mean, keep in mind, over the course of the story, Wally West was suddenly imbued by these powers. He panicked, didn't know what to do, and just ran, took off, only to discover that Eleanor Thawne had taken his father. And so Wally raced back, and that's where everything popped off with the Still Point. And now he's here, right? So quite literally, it was leaving, coming back, trying to save his dad, losing his dad, and then taking off again. There really wasn't any actual time for him to learn anything that was really going on. And so that's when he starts going down this investigative trail. What's also kind of cool is that Wally's learning about his powers as he uses them. For example, he like blows open a fence, using his powers. And when Linda asks him, like, I mean, you didn't even tell me you could do that, right? Like, what else can you do? His response is, I don't know. I'm still figuring my powers out. I know I can run really fast, but like, that's really about it. But he does mention we shouldn't be here very long. They will have people watching this place, even if this place is unoccupied. You don't allow a place like this to just sit, right? The wrong people will come in here, they'll start stealing tech, reverse engineering it, and who knows what kind of fate may befall the world in that kind of a situation. To say nothing of the fact that the people who are running it are very power hungry and very, very greedy. And so what ends up happening is that once they get into the main control room, that Linda Park literally starts hacking the computers and basically getting them into the information they need. The problem is before they can do anything, they suddenly hear a sound, or at least Wally does, and in responding to it, goes into a bathroom and sees all these mirrors all over the ground. Every single one of them are cracked except for one. And in that moment, Linda is yanked down into the mirror, and so is Wally West. Enter Sam Scudder, also known as Mirror Master. Now, Mirror Master is one of the most criminally underrated villains in the entirety of DC Comics. And I'll be honest, man, this guy, like this is one of those villains in DC that if he ever shifted over to Marvel Comics, it would be game over for pretty much almost anybody, right? Outside of like high-level reality warpers, right? He could just trap people in the mirror dimension. That's what he historically does in DC Comics. So to provide a little context here, there's the mirror world, mirror dimension. It goes by different names, colloquial terms, essentially. But the way that it's been shown has actually changed over the years in DC Comics. Focusing on more recent years, if we go and we look at like Mark Waid's run, for example, through Glass Darkly. So essentially the Flash issues 103 to 106, although technically it's only really 104 and 105. The mirror dimension is shown to be a place that really has like its own denizens, people who live in there. It's a self-contained pocket dimension within the larger main DC universe. But then if you go and look at Jeff Johns' run on the Flash, and specifically the Wonderland story arc, the mirror dimension is almost presented as being something akin to like Earth 3, right, where personalities are inverted. So it just kind of shifts and it changes. Now, by and large, most people don't bat an eye. Number one, because of the fact that you don't really see the mirror dimension all that much. And number two, when you do, it's only really a byproduct of whatever storyline you're talking about and whatever actions the Mirror Master is engaged in. But for the most part, I don't think I've ever really had an instance where I've seen a story that involves Mirror World and it sucks, right? For the most part, I've always loved it. So that's one of the reasons why I've never really had any objections to how it was depicted. When it comes to Mirror Master historically though, in the main DC universe, he'll yank people in there and he'll literally trap you in there. But more so than that, when you're in the mirror dimension, you can literally see any and everything that exists out there in existence, so long as there is some kind of a reflective surface within that space. And that's one of the things that historically makes him so dangerous, because it's not just mirrors, right? Windows, puddles of water, anything that shows a reflection can be accessed by Mirror Master, and Mirror Master can see through it. So he's basically everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It's one of the coolest things about him. But what's interesting here is that when Wally and Linda are yanked through here, Sam Scudder is not a traditional villain. They are technically chased by versions of Mirror Master, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But initially, they take off running and they start exploring the place. And one of the cool things that happens is they end up seeing the Kent family farm, Jonathan and Martha. So there's your reference to Absolute Superman. Not only that, they end up looking through what is also another reflective surface, and they end up seeing the Dibney youth mission, right? So again, they get this revelation pretty fast. As long as there's a reflective surface in a space, they can see it. Now, what's also really interesting is that as they're running through here, and then once Wally puts Linda down, that he looks down into a mirror and he sees his old family home that has a new family living in it, and even his old bedroom, but she looks down into a mirror and she sees her brother. Now, this is about as close as we get to any major revelations regarding Linda Park's backstory within the Absolute Universe. All she really says is that she and her brother were split up into different foster homes. Then he ran away and she hasn't seen him in 2 years. That's it. right? She says, I was so worried, I thought maybe he was dead. Do you think he can hear us? Do you think he can see me? And the response of Wally is, no, I don't think so. But then he ends up looking through a mirror and he sees Flish. And that's when he says, like, this is the still point. We're literally looking into the still point right now. And then he sees his father talking to Barry Allen in the still point, who's presumably explaining the nature of this place to Wally West's dad. The problem is he can't access his father. And in his anger, he starts smashing on the mirror and shatters it. And that's where these versions of Mirror Master start chasing after him again. And what ends up happening is that they're literally pulled out of the mirror dimension by the real Sam Scudder. And that's when he starts revealing what's actually going on here. Number one, he talks him down because their initial response is like, you're trying to kill us. And rightfully so. They've been chased by a whole bunch of folks who look just like him, and they've been trying to kill him the whole time. But what he reveals here is that he knows who Wally West is because he's been watching Wally. And of course, Linda's just kind of like, have you been watching me too? And he's like, not really. You're just not important enough for that, to be honest with you. Which on some level kind of seems to be a shot across her confidence, but she takes heart in knowing that this guy's not spying on her while she's taking a shower, because that would be really, really creepy. But what's interesting is that Sam tells him, I can send you back into the mirror dimension and I can get you to the still point, but you have to do something for me first. And Wally gets pissed, and it makes perfect sense because what Sam's doing here is he's basically just like dangling Wally's father in front of his face. Like, I can help you with this, but you got to help me with something else. And that's going to piss anybody off. But what Sam tells him is that number one, his name's Sam Scudder, that he's a physicist and an engineer, just like Barry, a little bit different than Barry, but he and Barry were working alongside one another with a fourth guy at Star Labs. And he says, we don't have time to explain everything, but I'll try to explain as best as I can. And he says, there was an accident that he created that place, the entire mirror dimension, but now he's trapped. He says, I'm tethered to the mirror dimension. I can't stay out of it for very long or I get sick. So I have to go back once every hour. And he says, but every time I go back inside there, I create another one of those doppelgangers of myself, doubles, soulless things. All they want to do is kill me. So I'm effectively a prisoner within this place. I'm always trying to outrun them and trying to escape them. And so that's why he says, you have to free me, Wally. And to do that, you have to go find Eleanor. And so he says, all of this, everything, all started back at Star Labs. Start your search there and start with a guy named Ray Palmer, Absolute Universe's version of the Atom. So again, this is why I say it's doing huge expansions to the DC Comics landscape. And so the funny thing about this is that Wally wants to go investigate on his own, but the response of Linda is no, like you're 100% going to take me with you. One of the other cool things that we end up seeing here is that there is a reflection of Wally and Linda within the mirror dimension. Now, whether this is designed to be a kind of Twilight Zone type ending where it's like all the reflections are behind, or they're going to play a major role in the future, I have no clue. So just kind of a feather in your cap, right? Something to keep in the back of your head for whenever it is that they may or may not appear at a point in the future. What ends up happening though is that once Wally gets back, getting some rest at the mission, that suddenly there's just like this giant amorphous blob of darkness that manifests out there. And Wally doesn't initially know what's going on. He actually races out there to see what it is. And then he's met with a future version of himself. And Wally doesn't realize that, right? He's just like, okay, like, who is this? Are you Barry Allen? And that's when he appears officially and Wally realizes who this person is, that it's him. And so of course, Wally asks, is this some kind of a dream? Right? And that's where future Wally just says, I wish it were, right? I remember how we're feeling right now. I remember how scared we are. And he says, Wally, you can't go back to the still point, no matter what. This may be the only time that I get to warn us. And this is where we start going down the rabbit hole, because what he does is that when Wally says, well, what about our dad, right? Like, I want to rescue our dad, that his future self says, it's already too late. Thawne took him below. And I'm so sorry because there is no getting him back. But Wally doesn't know what his future self is referring to. All he knows is the still force is a place. He doesn't know what it means when his future self is saying that he was taken below. below. And so in this effectively hellish landscape that Wally is in, this is a glimpse of what the future looks like, how bad everything is going to get. And that's why his future self says, this is not a dream. We are really here. I am showing you. This will happen. And so when Wally asks the question, what was that black amorphous blob that existed out there? His future self tells him, the Black Flash, death itself. We are the ones who did it, Wally. We're the ones who are going to set it free. But we can still change it. You have to stop looking for Dad. Now, this is a reference to the events of Final Crisis, and I'll talk about what that means here in a second. But as his future self starts to leave, Wally says, I'm going to find Dad, and there's nothing you can do to stop that. And his future self says, I know, I cannot stop you, right? I can only show you what will happen if you pursue this course of action, and if you try to save our father. You are going to unleash the Black Flash on Earth. Now, this is the reason why it ties into Final Crisis. When Barry Allen, quote unquote, died during the events of the original Crisis on Infinite Earths in DC Comics, he was supposed to have actually been dead. He technically did appear post-Crisis, but it was really more him just traveling through time from before his death in Crisis on Infinite Earths. During Final Crisis, he shows back up again. And what we end up learning here is that Death was quite literally chasing him around the Speed Force, and Barry was just constantly outrunning it. So when the events of Final Crisis happened and access to the Speed Force was opened up, Barry came running out, and Death was chasing right behind him. And so that's basically what this represents, that the Black Flash is quite literally Death personified for speedsters. Now, it's not to be confused with the Black Racer. The Black Racer is Death personified for new gods, right? Orion, Highfather, Darkseid, people like that. Believe me, it's very easy to get the two confused and to interchange them with one another. People do it all the time. I do it all the time. Contextually, most people will know what you mean whenever you say Black Racer, but you actually mean Black Flash. People will pick up on it pretty quickly. I guess maybe dickheads will make a big stink out of it, but most people will know what you're referring to. But when Linda Park finally shows up here, because of the fact that she didn't see this whole encounter with Wally and his future self, she thinks he's hallucinating. And of course, he starts talking to her, right? She's like, you were sleepwalking, that kind of thing. And he's like, no, right? Like, I was somewhere else, right? I was watching something that hadn't happened yet. And so when she asks him what he's talking about, he says things like time glitches, right? Time has some weird connection with my powers. It happened before, but this was different. I was actually there watching events transpire, effectively in the future. Now, this is a reference to the fact that over the course of the Absolute Universe line, one of the things that we've learned about Absolute Wally West is that while he hasn't quite figured it out yet, and even then, it hasn't been fully explained to us as the reader, seemingly he's a walking, talking embodiment of the cosmic treadmill, which is to say, with his ability to run at super speed, he can run through time. Now, that's a well-established aspect of the Flash mythos in the main DC universe. And so we're seeing him learning about it here in the Absolute Universe for the very first time. He hasn't quite figured it out yet. But beyond that, Linda Park has been doing research on her own, looking up Star Labs, the information that they got, Ray Palmer, different things like that. And so what she says was that Star Labs was some kind of an upstart super lab, right? That Sam Scudder was the one who founded it alongside Silas Stone, Ray Palmer, and Barry Allen. Now, Ray Palmer is the Atom, presumably the Atom in the Absolute Universe. Silas Stone is the father of Victor. Victor is Cyborg. So what we're looking at here is potentially Absolute Cyborg, which I gotta be honest, when I think of Absolute Cyborg, I basically think of Murder Machine Batman, the version of Bruce Wayne from Dark Knight's Metal that merged with Cyborg and was quite literally the most baller-ass looking of the evil alternate Batman that existed in the dark multiverse. It was amazing. If you don't know what that means, not a great big huge deal, but it was pretty dope. But what she says is that with her research, she learned that Star Labs had a whole charter of wanting to change the world, cutting-edge research into artificial intelligence, quantum physics, alternate energy, all that kind of stuff. She calls it nerd stuff, but we just call it science. But she's like, from what I read, their egos got in the way and it all imploded a year after they launched. And she says, your guy Barry Allen lost all of his funding and started teaching at Keystone University. And that's where Eleanor Thawne recruited him. So while we didn't necessarily get the backstory, that's where Barry Allen being discredited basically came from. And she says, there's literally nothing on Sam Scudder after Star Labs shut down, but we know what happened to him. Ray Palmer started working for Lazarus, but then he reportedly died a year ago, some kind of lab accident. But that's not true because Sam wanted us to find him. And because the mirror dimension allows him to see everything, it's not as though Sam's been existing in isolation and still thinks Ray Palmer's alive. No, he knows that Ray Palmer is still alive. But again, that reference to Lazarus, that's the organization that Absolute Superman was facing off against. And so that's where she continues on and says, after some big lawsuit with some others, Silas Stone kept the Star Labs name. As far as I can tell, he's still working out of one of their old offices in Detroit. So again, that sets the foundation for presumably the introduction of Absolute Cyborg. And so going back and forth in this conversation, Linda, having done all this research, wants to be on the journey and wants to go investigate. And the response of Wally is, no, not a chance. That's not going to happen. I am not putting you in danger again. So he literally races off to Silas Stone's lab out in Detroit. And this is when he learns another power that he has, the ability to phase through solid matter. So again, this is cool. His powers are growing and expanding, but this is where things get dope. And this is where you start to really learn what's going on here, because there comes a point when Wally gets into the lab, the whole place is basically derelict. It's abandoned. Silas Stone is nowhere to be found here, but he ends up tripping a hologram that was created by Ray Palmer. Now, the fact that this hologram exists and the fact that Ray is talking, this indicates that it has not been tripped before or hasn't been accessed before. Maybe it has, and he's just tripping it once again. And Silas Stone may have already seen it and then taken off. But regardless, he says, Silas Stone, at least I hope it's you. I am leaving you this message in case you somehow find your way back to your lab. Please know that I tried to find you, Silas. I truly did. But after everything that happened, I decided that I could not wait for you any longer. I had to at least try and stop Barry and Thawne from going any further with all of this. I don't have much time, so there are a few things that you need to know. First, this place that Barry found, this place called the Still Point, it's not what he thinks it is. Barry always thought too big. He never takes the time to look deeper. And he says, I'm pretty granular. So what this seems to indicate is that before the failing of Star Labs, Ray Palmer had already attained the ability to become the Atom. This feels like a play on words. And so he says, I looked past the surface, down to the quarks and to the leptons, and what I found, there's something hidden at the core of everything, Silas, something dark and terrifying. And when I say dark, I am speaking literally. I call it the dark particle, which I know is a stupid name, but it's the best way I can describe it right now. I don't think that we were ever meant to find this place. Barry and Thawne, they think of it as some kind of alien gold mine, an exotic moon to be plundered for miracles. But what they found is only the surface layer, and there is something terrible below it. So you have to listen to me, Silas. You need to destroy my lab, and then you need to find a way to destroy Barry and Thawne's work before it's too late. It might even be too late, right? I've done something foolish, and I don't know that I'll be coming back, but I've left you my journal. Maybe it'll provide you the breadcrumbs that you need. Whatever you do, keep it away from Thawne. It may be the only way to find me if I am truly lost. Because what this is revealing to us here is, yes, there's the still point, but all Wally West has seen is the surface. Down below it is something far more significant. And that's what's interesting about this, is there's two things to take away from this particular drawing here. Number one, there is kind of a dark shade in the background with a white circle in the middle. That right there makes me think of the white ring, the white lantern ring from Absolute Green Lantern. The other thing is the Omega symbol. Now, we as the reader know, if you've been following the Absolute Universe for any measure of time, that the Absolute Universe was quite literally created by Darkseid. So he is everything in this universe. So when Ray Palmer is making reference to the dark particle, that's literally the very nature of Darkseid himself. It's one of the cool things that we've seen over the Absolute Universe up to this point. Different people have discovered it in different ways. Seemingly, Absolute Joker figured this out, and it's kind of what made him into the person that he is. We still don't quite know his origin. I mean, we kind of got it, but again, the nature of Joker's origin historically, and pretty much any universe in DC Comics, is no one knows what his actual origin is, because he doesn't really know what his actual origin is. But outside of just discovering the very darkness that permeates all of existence, that everything else about him is a mystery. What we don't know, and honestly what I'm really hoping we find out at some point, has he actually met and talked to Darkseid? That would be phenomenal. Could you imagine that, right? Absolute Joker meets Darkseid? That would be incredible. That would be an incredible story. But the bigger point that I'm making here is that what Ray Palmer's doing, this kind of investigative work, different people have done it at different points in time. And so it's all like these little stories being pieced together and pulling together the idea that different people in different ways are discovering Darkseid is the source of everything, right? The source of all this power. And so what ends up happening is that in the face of all this information, when Wally goes back to meet with Linda Park, what ends up happening is before they can really do anything, he's basically contacted almost telepathically by Gorilla Grodd, right? Of course, Grodd basically being the little monkey that was being experimented on, and he and Wally became good friends. But during that whole fight, at the end of the last volume, Gorilla Grodd had discovered his father, and the two of them just raced off. And where Gorilla Grodd was very, I wouldn't say naive, but very almost empathetic in nature, benign in terms of how he functioned, his father had very much a disdain for the human race because he'd spent so much time being experimented on by people. And so a lot of that hatred that his father has seems to be influencing Grodd, but it's not necessarily that far reaching. And the reason why I say this is because when Wally and Linda show up here, right, where he's literally been contacted to arrive to by Gorilla Grodd, we end up finding out that all these cops have basically been ensnared. They're under mind control, and they immediately start attacking Wally and Linda. Now, of course, Wally with his powers ends up overtaking them all, right, taking these guys out for the most part quite readily. And so in the midst of all of this, Linda Park is knocked unconscious. And when the cops go to open fire and they almost kill Wally in this moment of distraction, Grodd jumps in and protects him. And then in that moment, powers down the cops. And that's kind of a cool thing because he asks, so who's this girl? And Wally's like, she's my friend. And he's like, well, any friend of Wally's is a friend of mine. But what he tells him is that, number one, when he discovered his father, they took off together. And number two, his father is very, very angry at the world. That when they got here, that his father had literally taken over everybody in this place, specifically because they were being chased after by the authorities. And so his father subdued the authorities, bent them to his will, and they've basically been operating as his agents ever since, at least those that he didn't kill. And so that's why he says things like, Papa is everywhere, because when you're able to mind control a mass number of people, they all become your eyes and ears. So even if you can't see those people looking at you, Gorilla Grodd's father can. And so he sees everything that's going on. And so that's why Grodd tells him, be careful, right? My father's near. He's everywhere. Now, of course, Linda Park ends up coming to, and then she realizes that Grodd is talking to her in her head. And instead of panicking, she's like, this is amazing, which is really cool. I gotta be honest. I love Linda Park in this story. She's like one of my favorite parts in this entire story. The problem with this is that Trickster from the Rogues has caught up to Wally and Linda and Grodd and has every intention of killing Grodd, quite literally. Trickster says, I'm sorry, kid, there's no other way. We have to kill Grodd. And the reason for this will be talked about in the next video. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.